Good afternoon and welcome to Louisiana Appleseed's Legacy Planning Application, MCLE, sponsored by Hancock Whitney. We are grateful for to Hancock Whitney for its support as a diamond sponsor of Appleseed's annual Good Apple Luncheon. Their sponsorship allows us to provide free MCLE events like this one today. Thank you, Hancock Whitney. Joining us today is Ashley Harrison, Senior Vice President, Community Reinvestment Act Officer at Hancock Whitney Bank and Board President of Louisiana Appleseed. Ashley?
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you to Louisiana Appleseed and to our esteemed panelists, Amanda Brown and Joe Ballard, for conducting this training today. We are so excited to have the opportunity to partner with Appleseed on what we feel is a very vital community service, which is by offering the services of estate planning and providing legalese to folks that otherwise would be unable to do it. And of course, for residents throughout Louisiana everywhere, this is a very important way that we maintain community and we keep our neighborhoods vibrant. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items that I'd like to highlight. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted on Appleseed's YouTube channel tomorrow. This class offers 2 hours of credit, including 1 hour of ethics credit. Please note that MCLE credit is available only to those attending the live Zoom today. For attorneys attending today, please note that you will see a survey in your browser window at the end of today's webinar. The survey will ask you for your name, bar roll number, and the number of pro bono or ethics minutes attended today. To receive credit for your attendance, please complete the survey. Tomorrow, you will receive a follow-up email. It will include the MCLE credit survey and a request for your feedback on today's event. Appleseed continuously reviews programs, events, classes, and webinars to ensure we provide exemplary content. Please help these efforts by completing this online Google form evaluating your experience. This feedback link will also be posted in the chat at the end of each of the 2 presentations if you are unable to stay for the duration. If you have any questions or need additional instructions on securing MCLE credit or providing feedback, please email me at awheeler@louisianaappleseed.org. My email will also be available in the chat. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Hancock Whitney, for your support. This wouldn't be happening without you. So now a little bit about Louisiana Appleseed and this project. Louisiana Appleseed solves our state's most challenging problems at their root cause by advocating for access to justice, opportunity, and education. Our state will be stronger through fair and equitable access to the courts, the economy, and public schools. To accomplish this, we build bridges between vulnerable communities and our extensive network of pro bono professionals to develop meaningful, sustainable solutions that help justice take root. Louisiana Appleseed has worked towards systemic change to protect generational wealth in land-rich, cash-poor communities since Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. Many homeowners possessed their property over generations but could not show a clear title. Thus, families were locked out of federal and private aid to rebuild post-Katrina. Appleseed successfully advocated for a legislative study on heirs property. The study engaged federal, state, grassroots, and corporate interests to identify structures that perpetuated the status quo inequitably. The result was a legislative amendment in 2009. Appleseed repeated this process and continues to do so today, each time building on previous findings and current events. Through the iceberg theory of change and persistent iterations and evaluations, Appleseed and its partners have unlocked over $16 million for homeowners statewide, helping low-income families maintain their home. An estate plan is the most effective preventative measure against the proliferation of heirs properties. Appleseed continues this work by holding legal clinics across the state. These events encourage people of all ages to make plans to leave their estates to the best stewards, even if the only asset they have is the small family home. Appleseed partnered with AARP Louisiana in September 2023 for an heirs property and estate planning clinic in Baton Rouge. Over 300 people registered to attend. Additionally, successful clinics in 2023 in Lake Charles, Shreveport, and Orleans with partners such as Southeast Louisiana Legal Services, Acadiana Legal Services Corporation, Southern University Law Center, and AARP Louisiana have illustrated the acute and specific need to facilitate drafting wills on the spot for clinic attendees. Legal aid offices draft approximately 300 wills annually. Meanwhile, over 500 people review information about creating wills on the website louisianalawhelp.org. With a will generator, legal aid offices estimate they can increase their capacity to serve by at least 50% and upwards of 100%. That's double. Thus, in early 2024, Appleseed partnered with Lanyap Law Lab to create a tech solution to address the need for wills en masse at clinic events. This MCLE trains and guides pro bono and legal aid attorneys using the Louisiana Legacy Planning Application to solve a legal needs gap. Attorneys will gain an understanding of the law and logic that guide client interviews. The course includes multiple hypotheticals and reviews legal implications of clients' estate planning decisions. Our first speaker today, Amanda Brown, is the founder and executive director of Lanyap Law Lab. She will provide our pro bono content with guidance on using the Legacy application. In addition to being a collaborating partner to Appleseed, she is co-chair of Louisiana's Access to Justice Commission's Technology Subcommittee. She is a member of the Legal Service Corporation's Emerging Leaders Council. She is also active in the American Bar Association, serving as the director of the Young Lawyer Division's Disaster Legal Services Program. And she is a member of the ABA Standing Committee on the Delivery of Legal Services. Before starting Lanyap Law in 2019, Amanda was a technology consultant for the Louisiana Bar Foundation on its statewide triage portal, the Louisiana Civil Legal Navigator. Before that, she served as the inaugural Microsoft Next Gen Fellow for the American Bar Association's Center for Innovation and was Southeast Louisiana Legal Services disaster recovery attorney. She is a proud ABA LTRC Woman of Legal Tech and a 2022 Fast Case 50 honoree. Welcome, Amanda, and thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, everybody, for joining. And a special thanks to many of you that I see on here that were actually an active part of this process of developing this legacy planning application. It truly would not have been, and I got to be honest, I'm coming back to you. It's still not possible without y'all's support. So just grateful for the opportunity to get to do this with Appleseed and with this group of amazing public interest minded attorneys across the state in order to help solve a really big problem here in Louisiana. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And today is really, my portion is really all about an introduction to this application and to give you specific insights into what it's going to be like to actually use the application, whether that's in a clinic setting or whether you're a legal aid attorney that will have access to this application as we move forward with rolling it out for use for everybody. So our main goals, in order to get that professionalism credit that we hope will be cleared, I am going to talk a little bit about Rule 6.1 of the Rules of Professional Conduct and really how this application and this process and your involvement in this actually does help facilitate access to justice and access to services in marginalized communities across our state. Then I'll move into more in-depth conversation about the history, the planning, the whole design process, all the things that I think are really interesting. They're really interesting to me, but gives you insight into what the amount of work and effort that went into creating this so that it's the best possible product and outcome for y'all as potential users of this application. With following that, I'll go into actually demonstrating, running some scenarios, showing you what the hands-on experience of using the application looks like. And then we'll have a little bit time, hopefully, for questions, feedback, and then a general conversation, or maybe, a fast round of ideas about what you guys think might be useful in future iterations of this tool. That is something that I want to emphasize, is that we're, starting here, but we would love to continue to work and develop this out so that it is, again, the best possible product for you all, and a most expansive version of this that is realistic for the public interest and volunteer community here in Louisiana. So moving into the first piece of this, Rule 6.1, the Rules of Professional Conduct. You know it, you love it, you should know it, you should love it. It is really all about voluntary pro bono service. That's why most of you are associated with Louisiana Appleseed. But it really comprises three main pieces. The rule in Louisiana suggests that you should do 50 hours of pro bono. This is an aspirational number, of course. I think in law school we're encouraged to do 40. So we actually do have a wider encouragement of pro bono culturally here in Louisiana. And those services should be directed to persons of limited means, without a fee or without the expectation of a fee. So you should go into it knowing that you're probably doing this for a free service for someone. And I have the asterisk here in the bottom part to clarify in the rule itself that yes, it's for persons of limited means, but your dedication, the hours that you serve, can also be in service of directly to organizations like Southeast Louisiana Legal Services, Acadiana Legal Service Corporation, in matters that are primarily designed to address the needs of persons with limited means. So I think everybody generally knows that you do pro bono without the expectation of fee. But I wanted to emphasize and highlight how we see this particular application and the use of it as a pro bono endeavor, and it helping you all assist low-income communities in life planning in general. So if you're a legal service, staff person, pro bono in this context isn't going to mean the same thing for you. You are getting paid. But nonetheless, we designed this tool to support you in that. And then importantly, as an organization at like the, administration and management level, the tool is designed to allow you all to implement things like clinics, in-person settings where you can have volunteers come in and support the communities by walking through this will generator and legacy planning process in order to give people access to those completed documents on the spot. So this is also a familiar model for some of you that are on here that is usually in our state in the context of the Wills for Heroes program that the state bar administers and often partners with our legal aid organizations. But it's the same concept. You would as a volunteer, come into a will clinic setting put on either by the LSBA Wills for Heroes program or a general clinic setting from a legal service organization, and walk clients through this process. As Adrian noted before, this is sort of a bigger leap. And as I demonstrate the application, you'll see the level of customization and specificity that you're able to get into this application that's not generally offered to, in quick document automation programs that are available to the public. So if you think of things like LegalZoom or Trust and Will, there are commercial products out there, but they can be cost prohibitive for for clients. They cost in the range from $200 to $300 to $500 for the generation of that document, and they're not really specific or a complete picture of the possibilities of Louisiana law. So they're very generic documents. They're better than nothing. I will always be an advocate for technology and legal tech that is maybe better than nothing. But this gave us an opportunity to really hone in on the nuance of Louisiana law and the different possibilities, and build that into an application that can serve you guys as you serve the community and give them quick access to these types of documents. So that's really the piece where we see the connection to that professionalism. It also makes it a more enjoyable experience for you to, do that process of life planning with a client. For example, if you feel uncomfortable or you're not familiar with doing the process of completing wills or other documents related to life planning, we built in tools, we built in direct links to the law, context for how you might counsel a client, what information you might need in order to elicit the proper response out of your client. So we do think that it is an easier experience for everybody involved. And so now I want to talk a little bit again about the specifics of what this planning process really looked like. I should have checked my animations. I'm sorry. But we look at this, I mean, this is truly a product. So I'm like really deep in the weeds on technology side of things, but when we look at this from a product development standpoint, there's a general process that you follow that goes from things like discovery to research and development and testing all the way through the implementation. And that's really the process that we followed here. So it started out with a need identification, conversations and being approached by Appleseed and other partners about the need for this, working through, this is unique maybe to a nonprofit, but working through the funding of this. It's not free. It takes a lot of time and effort, as you'll see, to create products like this, but the investment is worth it when you have these, virtually infinite possibilities for use. It really is a scale consideration on the funding side, but working through funding, and then getting deep into the heart of the actual research, design, and development process, moving into testing. And then now we're here, we're talking with you all about it, and we're starting to shift into this implementation process that will make this more widely available in certain settings. I'm not going to talk too much about the need identification. Adrian mentioned kind of the circumstances that we found ourselves in with this in respect to understanding people that had heirs property and realizing that you could catch them a little earlier in the process by doing this, a wills and life planning process with folks. Funding was specifically, this is a shout out, of course, to a few different organizations that have helped do funding for this program, which includes the Access to Justice Fund that's administered by the State Bar Association, and the funding coming from the Louisiana Bar Foundation's pots of money. Also, the National College on, I always mess it up, the National College of Trial Lawyers. It's in the app. I'll read it. I'll read it to you later. But it's not possible without funding from these organizations. And we will continue to, as we hear from you all, understand like if there are additional features, additional documents, additional things that we want to add to this. We can continue to seek funding through the Louisiana Bar Foundation's Community Partnership Panel. And this is being at this point contemplated with the Wheels for Heroes program, as they also work towards adopting this program in their clinic settings. So research and design, what that looks like for us was getting basic drafts of existing wills and documents related to this legacy planning application. And I, really poured over those, looking for commonalities, divergences, good language to pull out the main topics and categories of things, and then moved into subject matter expert working sessions. The first one being held at the disaster conference earlier this year, the disaster summit. And then taking, just again, pulling all this information, resources, listening to people's feedback, preferences, and then moving into a logic modeling process where we kind of design all the different components and logic and how the user experience and the flow is going to look, and getting feedback again from that same pool and a larger pool of subject matter experts that have, to give feedback on that. This is just a little bit, like, these are kind of the notes about how we kind of went through the working sessions process, generally focusing on what is it we're trying to accomplish here, who can or cannot or should not use this application. Are there any things in this process that are off limits? Because as you all as attorneys know, creating wills, like, that can get extremely complicated, and an automation solution is not necessarily appropriate for every iteration of a will. So trying to identify things like that. And then focusing on the general document structure itself. What are the main sections we need to, get information on? How do we organize that? How do we ask questions in a certain way? Again, are there any particular, assertions or sentences in the document that need to be there or not, and like what does the logic behind that look like? And that led to a more formalized, visualized version of that through this logic model process. So at the end of the day, when you work through the application, this is what is going on underneath the hood. Maybe I can share the PowerPoint after, but we really have a few main sections of the application, some preliminary stuff, a few main sections of the application, and then the production of the documents at the end. Development, I use a technology called After Pattern. Actually, they were acquired and now they're called Pattern Builder. But this is just a document assembly platform, considering the fact that our main goal is to produce documents at the end of this. And so these types of applications are extremely flexible and like allowing you to build in all this custom logic, but also do some of this workflow type automation and customization around the process of gathering information, of setting up events, creating passwords, all this kind of administrative stuff that needs to go in to make sure that the application gets into the people's hands that we intend it to get into, and not into the hands of the general public at large. Our testing strategy was an asynchronous process. We had about 10 or 12, I think, testers walk through several different versions of or several different pathways of the application, leave their notes about, preferences, comments on things like formatting, language, any, stuff like that. And then I took all that information, boiled it down, collated all that, and then made refinements and edits to the application itself based on the feedback. So this is just sort of an example of, all the different iterations of things that are possible in the application, helping us to keep track of like what pathways people took when they did a specific test. That way, if there were any issues, I could more quickly identify where things went wrong and make those changes. Because as you can imagine, there's a lot kind of going on in the background of on the development side of things. So this, I thought I would love to hear feedback actually from testers. It was super helpful for me to have all the written feedback in this way, but it was just a way to avoid more meetings, more, time from people, and larger group discussions where, things can be either too in the weeds on or not, or we don't hit everything possible. And then implementation is we're moving into that phase now. Adrian had reminded me the first actual will clinic event for the use of this will take place in sometime before the Super Bowl, so like in January sometime. And then we'll continue to roll it out with partners, including legal aid, who will get passwords to access the application. And then for clinic events, I'll do some separate demonstration with those organizations about how to set up events and passwords and share links and stuff like that. So we're moving into that, and I want to again emphasize that it's like an iterative process. I would love to say that I'll never find another bug in this thing again. I just simply know that that's not true. So feedback from everybody will be crucial in making sure, again, we can keep this as strong and accurate as possible. Okay, so that's all the background stuff. It's moving into how you actually use the application. I want to frame up, just for context, what lives within it. So there's currently three available documents. There's the last will and testament, healthcare power of attorney, and a living will declaration. I have an asterisk by the two healthcare power of attorney and the living will declaration to say that the last will and testament is the most complex of all of the documents. It's where most of the energy and effort went into creating this really robust, Louisiana specific will document. The healthcare power of attorney and living will declarations are a lot more of like a template that was previously adopted and existed in the Wills for Heroes program. So those documents are the same that were produced in that program. They're just there's not as much complex logic. It's really just more about a standard form and automating the input of, things like the person's personal information, name, address, parish of execution, all this kind of stuff. And then still producing that as a bundle here. Again, as we talk in the future, like if there are opportunities to improve that and expand on that, we would love to just continue having that conversation about making those documents a little bit more specific to clients' actual needs and desires. So those are the documents available. The last will and testament is largely broken up into three main buckets and a fourth if you count the basic client information. So that client information is things like their name and address, basic personal data. The will components themselves are marital and family history, the legacies that they would like to leave, and then representatives who they would like to be executor, if there are tutors required, things like that. So when I walk through the application and when you use it, that's the understanding is that there's three main parts here, and you're going to move through each of them independently, and that that will be what is included in the document, the last will and testament document that's produced itself. All right, I'm going to stop my screen. We're going to start doing a walkthrough, and this will be just where I kind of I'll show you and talk you through how to actually use the application. I lost my tab. Okay. All right, so landing page is just, basic context. A lot of the things that I already mentioned to you guys in the PowerPoint. I won't go through that in detail. As I mentioned, we are restricting this to lawyers that are within legal aid organizations or are volunteering for a legal aid organization or a will clinic. Today, we don't have any wills clinics set up in the system, so you'll get a notification if there are not any. There's no clinics today. Probably should contact the host if that's an issue. If you're using it in the capacity of a legal aid attorney, we will start to onboard legal aid organizations. Just for example, I put our 2 LSC programs here, and then we'll issue a password for that organization, and then just get information about which parish you're executing the documents in. That will be kind of propagated across them for the affidavit purposes. You'll then select which documents you would like to create. For this demo, I'm going to do all 3. And then you'll start seeing the different buckets and the different pathways. And we generally try to give you as much context for what's going to happen, like right as you need it. In this case, just noting we're going to start collecting some basic information. And then because I selected all 3 of those documents, setting the foundation for like what you can expect, how we're going to gather information, and really what you can expect in sense of the order for completing this. This is our basic information. I'm just using some dummy data. Middle initial was more controversial than expected. We recommend that you do include it if it's available. We understand that some people don't have a middle name or middle initial, but it is helpful for the will itself to include it. So throughout, again, you'll just see context building, trying to give additional instruction for the best way for you to format your information so that it populates in the document correctly. Date of birth, social security number, address, parish. And then for the will and testament, we have these, what I refer to as complications, like attestation complications that are going to impact what the language of the actual attestation looks like when the document itself is produced. I'm just going to go ahead and click none of those for now. And then now we'll really move into the substance of the last will and testament. As I mentioned before, it's structured pretty highly at marital and family history. Legacies is, of course, an obvious inclusion. And then representatives. We are also accommodating pets and pet caretakers in this application. But independent executors, tutors, all that is also included automatically when it's appropriate as we move through the application. So we'll just start collecting information about marriages. Marriage 1. Choose your date. And then if it's your current marriage or not, if it is not the current marriage, you'll select a reason as to why the marriage ended, whether that was death or divorce or annulment. And then the date. If you're not exactly sure of the end date, that's okay. We're actually just formatting this as a month and year of the marriage termination. So you can just simply choose a day in the same month that the marriage terminated. That's just in case your client doesn't know exactly that date. And these are created in what's called a loop process. So you can add as many marriages as your client has. It's just an endless kind of loop. So if it's just one, you'll move on and not add any additional. If there's 6, that's okay. You can add as many as you need to. And I'll just go ahead and choose that this is her current marriage and move on into the children's section here. You'll start by listing them out from oldest to youngest, but it really is, again, just like personal information, basic information about the child for the most part, including their birthday, whether or not they were born to or adopted by one of the previously mentioned spouses. If so, you'll get to choose which one of those this child is related to, and then other like complications or variations on this child is whether or not they were adopted. So we can note that in the will, whether they should be disinherited if they're a forced heir, and then whether or not the child was given up for adoption, just so we're again reciting the family and marital history as accurately as possible. I want to pause here and again highlight that throughout there are little clues or tips, explainers about different concepts, largely related to the law. So in this case, we're, touching on when is disinheritance appropriately, is it appropriate? So you'll get a sense that this is, used to exclude forced heirs. From their forced portion, if there's just cause, linking out to the law for that. And then noting too, like there's like a matter of strategy here. If the child is not a forced heir, you don't really need to disinherit them. Omitting them from the will is sufficient, and there's language in the will that's produced that speaks to the omission of heirs as being intentional. However, based on conversations with subject matter experts, it seemed like maybe, if there were just causes and the potential or concept that a child might subsequently become a forced heir, you may still want to disinherit that child. So moving forward, the disinheritance at this point could be a good strategy for this person. So if in this case, I did choose to disinherit the child, I'll just briefly run through it. You'll choose one of the causes that are listed in the civil code, and then provide a description of the events so that it's compliant with the burden or the standard like articulation for cause by the law. And then again, more connections to the law if you want to browse through, make sure that everything's kind of above board on that particular aspect of the law. And then from there, you'll start seeing these lists in these looping sections where there are, kind of infinite adding. At the completion of that process for one individual person or item, you'll start getting the list reflected back to you, and then continue to add more as necessary. So I'm just going to breeze through this one. And that's the second child. No special circumstances on that one. So with the family and marital history out of the way, we're shifting into the legacies component of this. I'm also going to pause here to note that in this application specifically at this time, all legacies are automatically designated as separate legacies. And this is going to require you to allocate percentages of each legacy if it's left to more than one person. If it's left to one person, it's fine. It's 100%. It's no big deal. But if you want to divide property, and like a particular asset between multiple people, you will be required to allocate a percentage to that individual. And this is done on purpose in conversation, and really thinking back to the original intent of this application is to minimize the proliferation of heirs property in Louisiana. And that is a common result of legacies that are not separately designated to individuals, like with a specific portion. Again, this is constantly in flux, but this is the decision at this point. So just be aware of that when you move through the application. You'll be required to add a specific designated percentage to, you know, for that legacy. And then if you wanted to learn more, I did link to Louisiana Appleseed's website where you can see their booklet on the Protect Your Property that goes into a little bit more in depth about how heirs property happens and why it's important to prevent it. So at the top of the legacy section, we want to figure out, does this person want to leave a specific legacy to people, or do they just want to, you know, designate their entire estate to be split up, you know, or to one person or to be split up between multiple persons. In that case, it's simple. If you don't want to leave specific gifts to anybody, you get the option to choose whether you want to leave it to all, you know, all to one person or all to multiple people, and then step through that way. Or the alternative would be, yes, you'll leave specific legacies and then allocate the residue, the residual assets of the state, either to one or multiple people as well. So we're kind of gathering that information about how they want the legacies to be structured up front so that we can properly collect those and populate the document as we move ahead. I'll go ahead and choose yes to specific and yes to multiple people for the residue. Again, more context setting here. In this section, you'll do specific legacies and we'll collect information about that particular item. And then you'll tell us how you want it to be, how the client wants it to be allocated. There's also the ability to add a usufruct over a particular piece of property, as well as a backup legatee, you know, in those circumstances. And then once you finish that process is then where you'll move into the residue of the estate. I'm just going to do a quick immovable and a financial asset, since those are the most sort of complex here. So on an immovable piece of property, you'll give a general title to it that will be put into the will. And then as we were doing testing and having these conversations with subject matter experts, the question around should you list an address of an immovable kept coming up. So I think the result of that was that there can be pros and cons to both. And so this is a strategy that you'll want to consider with your client. So if it's something that, you know, the client intends on selling, or never selling, including the property, can be fine. That's a good practice to be as specific as possible. But if it's something that might eventually be sold, it may accidentally invalidate something like a family home that can be a generic concept of immovable property. But it may invalidate that provision if it's too specific as to the address, and then that is subsequently sold. So that would just require them to update the will again. I would say it's not that big of a deal, but for a lot of people unable to afford a will, it might actually be problematic to do that. So it's really, again, a conversation for you as the attorney and the client to have, and really just understanding what their specific scenario and circumstances. And then if you do decide to list the address, we just give you suggestions about how to format that so that it looks clean in the document. I'm not going to add an address, but just kind of pointing that out here. And then for particular pieces of property, you can leave it up to 10 people. You can allocate percentages to up to 10 people. As I noted to our testing and our subject matter expert groups, if this feels restrictive in some way, let me know. With this technology, it wasn't possible to have like an infinite loop of items with an infinite loop of legatees, and to properly associate that so that it was clean and clear in the document. So this is a more manual entry process. But with that, like we have 10, we can add as many as is necessary. That's just kind of a baseline here, and a note for feedback or comments later. I'll just say two, and then for each legacy, as I mentioned before, you'll get the option, do you want to designate a backup, or do you want to designate a usufructuary? And then moving through with collecting the particular information about that legacy. So I'm just going to do legacy number one, and then a percentage here, we'll say 45%. Legacy number two, I'm going to do 45%. And throughout the legacies, this is the great feedback from the testers that they were looking to make sure that we're capturing 100% of legacies throughout the application. So in this case, I only entered 90%. So the user will get a notation or a note to go back and review your math and make sure that this adds up to 100%. We can't stop you. I mean, I guess we could stop you from moving ahead if it's not 100%, but the intent is just to raise a flag and have folks go back to make sure that everything is adding up correctly. And then similarly, if I overshot, we'll get a notification that the allocations are over 100%. So go back and review that. So that's kind of a persistent feature throughout the legacies section of the application too. Just backups, and usufruct. Sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry, I messed up. I'm not reading fully. The usufructuary would go there, and then when should their usufruct terminate? It can, of course, be a variety of reasons. It could be a death at a certain, remarriage at a certain date. So it's up to you to kind of fill in the blanks there. We might add a drop down with the options in the future, but right now it's just sort of a narrative process. And then if you wanted to add more than one backup legacy or usufructuary, we give you instruction on how to accomplish that using the fields that are here. And you'll see, this is like a consistent format and structure, again, throughout the legacy section of the application. So I'm not going to demonstrate it again. Let's just say until death. And then you can add, again, as many assets as you would like. Movables is a simple process. It's just the description of it, how many people, and then the same kind of backup or usufructuary process. Financials is a bit more involved, where we'll ask you which type of asset it is. Is it a bank account? And then where is it located, in the last 4 digits of that account number, so we can properly notate, for example, if there are multiple bank accounts in the same banking institution, you want to have an identifier or a differentiator between those assets. And then cash is just kind of like, where is it located? How many people you want to leave it to. And the process for designating percentages or dollar amounts is the same as before. So you'll see that going ahead. Skip that. And then I'll note too, you'll kind of see reminders at the top of your screens about like what asset you're actually talking about. So this is the bank account at Concordia Bank with the account ending in 1234. So let me just breeze through here. And move into a recap of the particular legacies that were made. And so this is really the language that you'll see in the will itself. Really just outlining what it is you had just put into that previous section. And then, so you could call it back to a client if that doesn't work, or if it seems incorrect, you can go back and change your answers. And then the last piece of the legacies is, in this case, a residual legacy section. So and because we had said earlier, we want to leave it to multiple people we're going to collect their name, and then again, that allocation, the specific percentages, to make sure that those legacies are separate in the will itself. And this is also a loop. So you can collect as many residual legacy like heirs as you would like, just like in the other previous sections on marital and family history, as well as, the other specific legacy section. But I'm just going to do a couple here. We'll go 50%. And I'm just going to skip the backups. 50%. And you'll see, okay, this is 100% has been allocated here, giving you some, chance to correct if anything is not adding up. And then for the residue, if they would like to add a usufruct for the residue of the estate. And then similarly, like the other section, if you wanted to add multiples, I'm realizing I don't have my little instruction box, so I'll add that. But you can add multiples here if you want multiple usufructuaries over the residue. There's just a prescribed format for you to type that in. I'm going to skip that because it's the same pieces of information, and there's a recap for you on the residue before we move into the representative section. Now this primarily is oriented around the executor, tutors if there are minor children, and then pet caregivers. Executor is a constant. It will always be there, as you know, as a lawyer. Tutors, this section will show up if you, in the previous section, added children that their date of birth makes them minors. So it will force you to add tutors and a tutor or tutors in those cases. And then pet caregivers shows up if you recall back to earlier in the application where they said they had pets that they would like to appoint caretakers or representatives for. So that's kind of how the logic is working under there. I'll just do some fake data here. And let's just say they are, that Larissa is Hedda's friend. These names are really interesting. They are random, by the way. Did not make them up. And then if they would like to add a backup executor, you can do that here as well, and then set their relationship. Tutors, in this case, I did, there were 2 children and they were both under 18 years of age. So there's this question as to whether or not you would like to appoint the same tutor for all children, or if there should be different tutors for each child. And that if it's just a single tutor, we'll collect the tutor's name, and designate them appropriately in the will. If there are multiple tutors, you're going to move into a loop section that will collect as many tutors as there are as are necessary for the children. And then if you want to add a backup tutor, you can do that as well. And I'm realizing now actually that's an error. Shouldn't be there for this selection. Anyway, because I said multiple tutors for each child, you'll get to choose. This is a filtered list of children that are under 18. In our case, both were under 18, so they're both on the list. But if there were 6 children and only 2 were under 18, you're just going to see the 2 that actually need to have a tutor assigned to them. And you'll just put in their information. If you want to back up, you can add that backup here. And then for the second child, same thing. And you just kind of reciting, all right, these children already have tutors assigned to them. Okay, we're getting close, I promise, on the will stuff. Pet caretakers, if there's just one pet, much like the tutor section, you're just going to designate one pet caretaker and then have the option to either appoint a backup or pet caretaker and to leave a monetary gift, like a pet trust, to someone to take care of that particular pet. Alternatively, if you have two or more, you can either do the same caretaker or a different caretaker for each pet and get questions related to that. For the sake of time on this, I'm just going to do the same caretaker. But you can appoint a backup here, and then a monetary gift, like as a pet trust, you can enter in the number, and then this will actually go into the specific, like the particular legacy section of the will, and that's just in case, maybe in a scenario where the person didn't really leave any particular legacies, and they instead just kind of distributed property, generally. But this is technically would be kind of considered a particular legacy. So we'll go into the particular legacy section of the document. And then you'll get a recap on what your choices were and have been. And that's it, for the will. Again, now I know this is going on a bit long, but we're closing in on the healthcare power of attorney and the living will declaration, which, as I mentioned before, are just template documents. So we're already taking information from the front of the application in the about the client section, and now we're just going to get the very basics about, in this case, for healthcare power of attorney, who they want the representative to be, and then where they live. So that can be inserted language into the document. That was not good. Dummy data. And then that's really all for the healthcare power of attorney. The living will that is used is the one that's proliferated by promulgated by the state of Louisiana. I mentioned that had been used in the Wills for Heroes program before, and there's really only two options here. It's whether or not you want food and water to be withheld, and to withhold, life-sustaining procedures or measures. And so whichever choice is made will go into the document. And the last component of this is just our signatories. After having feedback, we implemented this to be optional. So if you were the notary and you had two witnesses in front of you and you wanted to just go ahead and type it in now, you can add that information, and we will format that for you in the document. Or alternatively, if you just want blanks, you can get that version as well. I heard in a clinic setting, it might not always be obvious who's going to be doing what. So that piece is optional. But there's some customization as to whether or not, if the notary is actually an attorney, we're going to say, we're going to insert language, their bar roll number. If they're just a notary, we're going to say their notary number. And then for attorneys, knowing that their commission expires at death, we'll just go ahead and insert that. Alternatively, notaries will be required to put in the expiration date of their commission. So that's what that looks like. And then you can put the witnesses' names, and they'll be added under their signature blocks, so you wouldn't have to write them in. And this is useful since it's across all three documents that you have witnesses, and then for two documents, a notary. So it can be a time saver if you're producing all three, but writing it in later is also completely fine. So that is it. You'll get this screen here, which will give you instruction to click on these icons, which represent the documents themselves. Let me stop and I'll do a reshare. And then you'll see the custom document that had been created with all the information that's related to that process that you just went through. So you'll want to review this with the client, clean up some spacing. I'm fully aware that spacing is a little bit questionable. That's because of the level of logic and customization that's in there. When you put in like a variable, it necessarily leaves a space, which is a little bit of a bummer, but it's easy to just kind of back into things and clean it up a little bit. But that's what it will look like. You'll sit down, review that with the client, and then move through the signature process with them after you print it. So it is 1:30. I managed to fit it in on time, but I wanted to see if there were anything I need to answer. Adrian?
Sure, there's one question on whether, if you could talk a little bit philosophically, we've got about 15 minutes left, on AI versus document automation and why this is the route that we went as opposed to trying to do an AI version. If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the AI, I am a big believer in what the power of AI will be. I just don't think it's there yet. There's not a lot of commercially available products that will let you do this kind of the level of specificity and routine, like structure that we have in this document. And I think that's what's like AI in general is good at like more creative things that you want more that you're okay with like more open interpretation on. But in this case, if we really have specific goals about creating an instrument that is strong, that meets exact needs that we have, it's really kind of better to go this route at this point with the current state of where artificial intelligence really is. So it is a lot of work, but it's you're going to get the precision and you're going to get the I'm trying to think of the right word for it, the precision, but also like it's like a standardization of that that everybody is comfortable with, everybody has agreed upon, everybody knows what the outcome of that is going to be. So that's like a little bit more of a powerful scenario for us right now.
I think to add to that, especially with the problems that we're trying to solve and the communities we're trying to serve, being able to have these conversations one-on-one with an attorney through a guided process with the document automation allows for attorneys to find other issues. One of the things that we learned in providing wills, I'll give you an example, Terrebonne and Lafourche, we went out asking if people had heirs property, and about 34 people came back and said we need a succession because we have heirs property. Compare that with going back to the same Terrebonne Lafourche communities, and we had 150 successions and 100 wills that were created when we actually just said, do you need a will? And so by the virtue of asking, do you need a will, we often learn that they don't have ownership of the property to begin with. And so then we can go back and remediate any sort of issues, open previous successions, and then get to the will and write the will for the person. So it's a kind of collateral attack is what I often think of it as, is in doing a document automation and having to sit down with an attorney. That's exactly why this is not an application that is open to the public, and why this is a document or an application that is password protected for legal aid attorneys only, and for pro bono activities and Wills for Heroes activities, because we value the perspective an attorney will have, and we're trying to take away some of the labor, just copy paste. And so moving that to having that dialogue with a person as opposed to, I've got all your stuff, give me 3 days, I'll get it back to you. So for a small succession, if their estate is less than 125,000 and they want to leave everything to their descendants and children, I mean, again, I think I'm reading one of the questions. would we explore whether or not a will is necessary? If a person just wants to leave everything to their descendants, children, and the estate is less than $125,000, if they have a will, their successors will have to file a petition for possession in court rather than a small succession affidavit, which means costs for the heirs. And I think, again, this is where it comes back to having those conversations with people and where an attorney is really valuable. One, if it turns out,
can I jump in?
yeah, absolutely.
The small succession statutes have been amended. You can now file a small succession that is a testate succession. So just because you have a will does not any longer keep you out of using the small succession procedure.
Also, if they want to leave everything to their descendants / children, again, it gets back into an heirs property situation. So do we want to continue using a small succession affidavit and have to deal with heirs property and diluted wealth in low income communities? Because that's inevitably what happens. So having those conversations with testators is important. But if as you are doing your consults, you find that it's one child and less than $125,000 is the estate, I think that's a great conversation to have and not have to do a will. Or you do a will and you can still take advantage of the small succession costs. So are there any additional questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for all of the time, energy, and effort you spent in creating that alongside Louisiana Appleseed, as well as a number of the folks who are here in working on it. This is something that, from what I have heard from legal aid attorneys, would reduce the burden considerably. Let's see, Charles Tate has your hand raised. Do you want to type in your question? Let's see. Oh, I think Charles Tate had signed up. Oh, I see. There we go. Mr. Tate. You are muted, Mr. Tate.
Okay. Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, this has just been a terrific CLE, and the work you guys are doing are fantastic. And let's go to the next step. So what I've been doing about 16 years is working with nonprofits doing affordable housing. And I've helped a lot of nonprofits with a lot of other things. Wouldn't it be nice if the documents that are prepared would be a placeholder for future reference? So when the imminent need for the succession occurs, you guys were in there was a placeholder, and possibly I forgot what they call the notices that go with the clerk's record. So that way, when somebody is trying to figure out what to do the next step, they would systematically call the contact person, and hopefully there would be a few dollars earmarked in there for Louisiana Appleseed to keep this thing going. Because what you're doing is you're permitting what should be assets to remain assets. And when we have what we have, when you look at the average abandoned haunted house going down the street, it's not because of the condition of the house, it's because of the folks, visionaries like yourselves and your organization were not here in time. And so the idea would be, and I would love to have this conversation with y'all because I think there's some ways to do what we're talking about, would be to maybe bake into the cake an option of a donation or some interest to Louisiana Appleseed to be able to look to in the future, so that when it's time to transact the next step and the succession, the conveyance of property, perhaps there'd be a sustainable revenue stream for you that's so badly needed, and also for local nonprofits you could collaborate with. And I'd love to have this conversation. Whoever wants to brainstorm sometime, I think it'd be really terrific. I mean, I really think there's a way to do this. Okay, hey, that's it. And thank y'all for putting up with with me trying to fumble for my. I'm going to go back and try to find my mute button again here.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. We'll have to get in touch with you after the CLE. Are there any additional questions? Okay. Then we will move on to the ethics component of our CLE. Thank you again, Amanda. Next, I'm happy to introduce our final speaker today, our second and final speaker, providing our ethics content on pro bono services in estate planning contexts. Joseph R. Ballard graduated from Tulane Law in 1983. He has practiced law in New Orleans, Alexandria, and Baton Rouge. He is currently a staff attorney at the Pro Bono Project in New Orleans, where he handles various civil matters for low-income clients, including divorces, wills, powers of attorney, successions, tutorships, and interfamily adoptions. Welcome, Mr. Ballard, and I am happy that you are here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Some of this is going to be repetitive, and I apologize in advance, but that's just the way it goes when you come to these kind of programs. Let's go to slide number 2, please, can we? So there we go. The idea would be to beat a dead horse and talk a little bit about Rule of Professional Conduct 6.1, which you've already been over once today. And then we're going to talk about some duties that you owe your pro bono clients, including competence, diligence, communication, confidentiality, loyalty. And then we're going to talk a little bit at the end about the duty to determine capacity. Next slide, please. Rule 6.1 of the Rules of Professional Conduct is a definition of what pro bono legal work is. And there's a certain particular thing we're going to talk about later on in this presentation. Sometimes it's important to know technically what pro bono legal work is. So if you need to know a technical definition of it, always go back to 6.1, and it's legal work for those unable to pay. And the work is for persons of limited means or for charitable, religious, civil, community, governmental, and educational organizations in matters that are designed primarily to address the needs of persons of limited means. Next slide, please. The big picture is that you owe the same legal duties to your pro bono clients as you owe to your paying clients. And, to some extent, this talk is going to be aimed, maybe not necessarily at what turns out to be the target audience here, which is people who do work for SLLS or work for Acadiana or work for such organizations full time anyway. But a lot of this is going to apply to volunteer attorneys who take on matters. So, for example, at the Pro Bono Project, we do take on and handle matters with our staff attorneys, but we also try to find volunteer attorneys out in the community to take on substantive matters, including writing wills and powers of attorneys. And one of the things that we need to be careful of without getting too preachy about it is that in today's legal environment, I mean, I had the experience of starting to practice law in the mid 80s when it was the tail end of the days when the practice of law was still considered a profession, and kind of the very beginning of the days when it morphed into being a pretty cutthroat business. And today we are trying to place cases with people who are engaged in that cutthroat business, and they want to do good things. They want to do pro bono work, but they're stuck in an environment that demands a whole lot of their time and attention just to make their billable hours and to collect the amount of money that their firm expects them to collect. And in that environment, sometimes these legal duties get short shrift when it comes to the pro bono clients. A lot of this is just sort of, I guess, a little overly preachy, and I apologize for that. But if you look at the duty of competence in Rule of Professional Conduct 1.1 as it relates to powers of attorney, uh, it's interesting if you go back to the Civil Code articles on representation and mandate, which is, of course, being Louisiana, and that's what we call powers of attorney. We call them procurations. Uh, it's amazing how many code articles are devoted to this topic. I mean, you think it's just a simple matter of, you know, Sheriff Andy Taylor deputizes Deputy Barney Fife to go out and do something for him. I mean, you're just making someone your agent to act on your behalf. And it obviously gets very complicated because there's a whole bunch of civil code articles that deal with the complications. What you need to be aware of as part of the big picture when you're doing powers of attorneys and talking with your clients about what they want. First, Article 2986 of the Civil Code says that procuration does not require an agent's signature. It is defined as a unilateral juridical act. Now, when I do powers of attorney, if possible, I try to set them up to have both the principal and the agent sign the instrument. And the reason I do that is simply because the third persons who are going to be relying on that power of attorney seem to have a higher comfort level if they see both people's signature on the document. And particularly if you read it, because most power of attorneys have um, language in the document saying that the agent accepts the appointment. Well, the agent accepts the appointment, and you're reading a document that the agent hasn't even signed. It's, as a lawyer, you kind of do a double take there. So technically, no, you don't need the agent to sign it. The procuration is unilateral, but I like to have both signatures on there if possible. Sometimes it's not possible. Article 2995 limits the agent's ability to prevent others from contacting the principal. I wondered what that meant the first dozen or so times I read it. And then I started writing powers of attorney for pro bono clients a couple of years ago. And it is surprising to me how many times uh, I have run into the situation where, for example, mama is in a nursing home. She appoints her reliable, sane daughter to be her agent, but that daughter has siblings who are maybe not so reliable or not so sane. And the next thing you know, the daughter is calling up the nursing home saying, I demand that you not let my brothers and sisters talk to mama because that's what she wants. She's made me her agent. And as her agent, I'm telling you, don't let these people visit with mama or talk to her. Well, that puts the nursing home in a bind. And the civil code actually deals with it and to a certain extent, the agent can do that to protect the principal, but there are limits on it, and those limits are set forth in Article 2995. In Article 2996, the code says that you need specific authority to alienate, acquire, encumber, or lease a thing. Again, short form power of attorneys, and really all of them, always say something like, I hereby give my agent the authority to do anything that's legal. And that's not necessarily enough. If that's the power of attorney that the agent takes to a real estate closing, there's going to be trouble. So if the agency, if the mandate, if the procuration, if the power of attorney is meant to include the authority for the agent to transact business, specifically to buy, sell, mortgage, grant a usufruct, or lease a thing, particularly real estate, but it applies to movable property as well, then it needs to be set forth specifically. Article 2997(1) says that you need specific authority for inter vivos donations. Again, that's not necessarily something that you would have thought of on your own. And the general language of the power of attorney you might think would cover donations, particularly donations of movables, but it doesn't. It has to be set forth specifically. Article 2998 says you need specific authority to self-deal. And that means that you have a power of attorney, and mother gives favored child the agent, makes the favored child the agent, and the next thing the favored child does is conveys mama's home to herself, to the detriment of the other siblings, and mother hasn't even written a will yet. That kind of self-dealing obviously is subject to great abuse, and the code requires specific authority for self-dealing. Article 3024, automatic termination at death of the principal. Again, something that I was surprised to find out when I started doing this, when I started writing powers of attorney, is I have had several clients who have told me, I need a power of attorney so that my daughter can clean out the safe deposit box and the bank accounts when I die. And you have to explain to them, well, it doesn't work that way. You can't use a power of attorney to do that. It expires when you expire, and you're going to have to deal with those matters by writing a will. Or in the case of a bank account, an option would be to make the bank account payable on death, and get together with the bank and set it up that way. Finally, Article 3027 says that the revocation of a power of attorney may not be effective against third parties until filed in the conveyance records. And this has obvious reference to ongoing negotiations that result in some kind of a real estate deal. But again, it's not limited to immovable property. It applies across the board. So if your client has made child number one the agent, and child number one has started negotiating some deal, and your client says, I don't want child number one to be my agent anymore. I want to revoke that and get a new power of attorney and make child number two my agent. If anything is cooking, particularly in the real estate area, you want to make sure that the new power of attorney that contains revocation language is filed in the conveyance records where the client lives, and also conveyance records of any place where the client owns property. I've cited two cases here, Tatum v. Riley, really in a way apropos of nothing, but if the whole idea of representation and mandate is so far in the dim past of studying for the bar exam that you just remember nothing about it, and you just want a general overview of how the whole code articles are set up and what they're meant to accomplish, there's a good discussion in that case about the whole area. Quealy versus Payne-Weber is a Supreme Court case from 1985. And I don't want to make too much of this. A notary was sued for notarizing a false document, and he was held not liable because he exercised the precaution of an ordinary prudent businessman in certifying to the identity of the person who appeared before him. So that's just something to keep in your back pocket. If you're not only writing this will, but you're notarizing this will, just take ordinary precautions. Ask the person for a photo ID, like a driver's license or something like that, of government issued ID. And if you are really organized and like to keep track of your notarial activities, obviously you would keep a record that on such and such a date, this person gave me driver's license number, blah, 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 with the name such and such on it, and then you notarize the signature and you keep your records that way. Actually, you're supposed to do that anyway. I know about 2 people out of 10 million who do that, but for what it's worth, you're supposed to do that. Next slide, please. Now, when it comes to wills, the code is full of formalities. As you may know, Louisiana is particularly when it comes to notarial wills, Louisiana is very, very tough on will formalities, much tougher than a lot of common law states are. There's been some movement in the last few years for Louisiana in the courts, in the court decisions, to move a little bit toward a substantial compliance standard. But that movement is very slow, very halting, and very reluctant. So the best thing to do is make sure that the will complies with the formalities, so that if it's contested and goes to court, you're not embarrassed by having a will that you wrote be declared invalid because it didn't meet the formal requirements. Basically, these requirements are contained in Civil Code Articles 1577 to 1583. 1573 says that a formal defect renders the testament an absolute nullity, which means that the dead person is now died intestate, and regardless of what the will says, you go to the intestacy rules to see who takes the estate. Articles 1578 to 1580.1 tell you what to do if the testator is illiterate or can't sign their name, and that's why Amanda went through that section of the will generator, where you tell the will generator whether or not this person is illiterate or can't sign their name or has some kind of disability like that, because there are different attestation clauses for each of those situations. Article 1581 says that you can't be a witness to a notarial testament if you're insane, blind, under age 16, or unable to sign your name. So it sounds like it's. I actually had a case or an occasion or two where it's time for the will signing, and the person comes in, and there's a person being put forth as a witness who, may not have been over the age of 16. So if you don't think about asking that question, you could end up with a witness who is an incompetent witness under the law, and that puts the will at risk. Article 1582, notary and witnesses are not allowed to be legatees, as Amanda mentioned. But the question, and the great thing about the will applicator is it should prevent that from happening, because it warns you about that. It warns you that these people can't be witnesses. Legatees can't be witnesses, and the notary can't. But what if they are? There are cases that look at that. And actually, the Civil Code also says in 1582 that the legacy is invalid, but not the testament. In other words, they don't throw the whole will out, but that particular legacy is invalid. But there's a wrinkle there, because it also says that an intestate heir who is a witness, who is also a legatee, can take the lesser of the intestate share or the legacy. So if you are in a situation where your client is close to death, time is of the essence, you've got to get the will signed and get it signed now. And you're in a situation where you're just short of witnesses, and a forced heir is the only person who is available to be the witness. When if you can discuss this with your clients, it may be that they decide to go ahead and do it, because they might decide that having the will with say the minor child forced heir witness is still a good thing, because he can still take what he would take under intestacy, yet the rest of the will can get rid of the disposable portion the way the writer of the will wants. So, it's just something to keep in mind. It's probably never going to come up, but if it does, there's a code article for that. 1571, the testator's agent may not execute the will for the testator. Also, you can't make one will for two testators. This again could come into play if you have a testator who is competent, is in his or her right mind, but is become an invalid, and again, you're talking about you may have to do a different kind of attestation clause in that situation. But your client might say, oh, well, my daughter has my power of attorney, she's going to sign the will for me. No, can't do that. Will not work. You've got to go take a look at the alternate attestation clause if the testator can't sign, physically unable to sign. Article 1572, generally a testator can't leave it up to somebody else to choose how to dispose of the estate. but the testator may expressly leave some decisions to the executor. I won't go into the weeds on that, but the article is there if you need to look at it. The next slide, please. Some other important areas of the law under the Civil Code and other parts of the law that you need to consider that are important as part of your duty of competence. You need to know about these things. Article 1493 and following deals with forced airship. And just to backtrack a little bit or review a little bit, this is something that has changed in my memory. But nowadays there are no forced airs under age 24. Over age 24, unless the person has the kind of disability that is set forth in the forced airship articles. And the specific language of the disability in the forced airship articles is not necessarily the same as the definition of a disability in the interdiction articles. So you might think that a person is interdictable, or you might think that a person is incompetent to sign a contract, and you might think that a person is not competent to sign a will. But those things don't always necessarily mean the same thing. They're using slightly different language in different code articles for different purposes. So if there's some question about whether there's a forced error, in other words, you're talking to the client, do you have any children over 24? Yes. Are they disabled? Yes. Well, what's the disability? Well, chronic depression. You got to do it. You got to dig a little bit more there. Articles 16, 17 through 26 deal with disinheritance, as Amanda mentioned. And disinheritance is only a concept that applies to forced heirs. So if your client has children over age of 24 under no disability, you don't need to disinherit them. You just write the will to not leave them anything. You don't have to say, I disinherit Johnny. If you don't want to leave Johnny anything and he's a competent adult, you just don't leave him anything. This inheritance is very technical and very specific, and it deals with, and the reason it is that way is because it's a way that you write a forced heir out of the will. So, for example, Article 1618 says that a statement of disinheritance has to be in the will or the codicil. You can't, attach or reference some third document or some outside document. It's got to be in the four corners of the will or the codicil that you disinherit this person. 1619 says that it has to be express and for just cause. 16, 20, and 21 gives an exclusive list of 8 just causes for a parent to disinherit a forced heir, and cause must occur prior to executing the will or the codicil. Article 1622 gives an exclusive list of 7 causes for a grandparent to disinherit a grandchild. And you may know this, I didn't mention it, but the forced heirship rules under some circumstances apply to grandparents and grandchildren. So you need to review those rules if you're in doubt about that. Article 1624 says that you must state the cause of disinheritance in the will of the codicil. 1620, and what that means is there are these 8 causes or 7 causes, depending on whether you're parent or grandparent. And they're things like, the classic one is the child has been, sentenced to Angola for murder. You can disinherit your child for that. You can disinherit your grandchild for that. But if that's the reason you're disinheriting them, you got to say so in the will. 1625 doesn't have to do with wills, but more with successions. It says that a disinherited heir can overcome the act of disinheritance by proving reconciliation. And 1626 says that the disinherited child has defenses, and in other words, if you contest the will and says, I know it was disinherited under the will, but the disinheritance is ineffective because 1626 tells you what those defenses are and who bears the burden of proof when you go into the will contest. There's a concept in the code of marital portion. It will never come up in all likelihood when you're doing pro bono work for a client, because marital portion deals with the situation where a spouse dies rich in comparison with the surviving spouse. And in that situation, the surviving spouse under Article 2434 is entitled to claim the marital portion from the succession of the deceased spouse. And the rest of that article fills in the details, and the other articles tell you the amount of the marital portion, which is currently capped at $1 million by Article 2434. So if you find a pro bono client where marital portion becomes an issue, maybe that client wasn't screened correctly in the first place. Prohibited substitutions are dealt with in Articles 1519 through 1522 of the Civil Code. And basically what it says is that if there's an impossible or contra bonus mores disposition in the will, it's going to be ignored by the probate court. They won't throw out the whole will. But if you want to leave $15,000 to your cousin Eddie to kill your cousin Jenny, that's not going to fly. That's a prohibited substitution. Article 1520, unless it's in a trust, a testator can't give a thing to the first person and force them to preserve the thing and deliver it to a second person when the first person dies. Again, to my surprise, I have seen more than once or experienced more than once a client saying, what I want to do is I want to leave my house to my son Johnny, and Johnny has to, and then when Johnny dies, Johnny must leave it to, my cousin Eddie. Well, the common law calls that mortmain statutes. They don't allow you to tie up property through succeeding generations. It's against public policy in every state in the union and also here. Article 1522 says that giving usufruct to one person and naked ownership to another is not prohibited. So that's fine. There are also rules of intestacy, which you need to be aware of. That's Civil Code Articles 880 through 901. And you need to know that, maybe just keep a chart handy that you can pull out and look at when you're talking with the client. Because as we saw earlier in this presentation today, there's a question whether your client needs a will at all. Well, to answer that question, you have to know what the intestacy rules are. What happens if you do die without a will? And as you know, the code in that situation will look at classes of takers. So they'll look at class number one. If there's one person in class one, that person takes it all. If there are two people in class one, then those two people split it 50-50, et cetera. There's nobody in class one, they'll go and see if there's anybody in class two. And it goes down the list that way in kind of concentric circles of how close these relatives are to the dead person. And if there is nobody at the end of the day, the state gets it all. So those rules you need to have handy. Also, please notice that rules of intestacy treat community property separately, differently than they treat separate property. And one of the things that you have to be really careful of when you're counseling a client about whether they need a will or not is you got to find out whether they're married and whether they're in community. And even if they're not in community, one of the things that they need to be aware of is that the separate property devolves in favor of the heirs. Okay, so that the surviving spouse could end up with nothing if there's nothing but separate property, and if there are no heirs after the 5-step process, the state. See, and the surviving spouse also loses out to the decedent's children, siblings, nieces, nephews, and parents. So if the person dies without a will and has a surviving spouse, but that surviving spouse is not going to take if there are children, siblings, nieces, nephews, and parents of the dead person. So that's a big reason why many testators will decide they would rather have a will than die intestate. And as mentioned earlier also, If the only asset of the estate, if it's a single person, there are no community property or surviving spouse issues, and the person owns real estate worth less than $125,000. Even if you have a will, you can now use the small succession procedure with a will. So just need to factor that in there. It might depend on the value of the property as to what the person wants to do and whether it's likely to increase in value. Because if it increases over 125 by the date of death, then you're out of the small succession realm anyway. But you're talking about the difference in filing fees of maybe $250 or $500. So if that's a big issue for the family, if it's an issue, it's an issue. Also, for those of you who are into the exciting world of online notarization, you need to know that under RS 35623, online notarization is not available for wills or codicils. And finally, under Code of Civil Procedure, Article 3396.2, you need to be aware that the law recognizes a designation of an independent executor in the will. So what it says, particularly in Section A2, it says, when a testament provides for independent administration of an estate, the court shall enter an appropriate order granting independent administration of the estate. And paragraph B provides that a statement and a testament to the effect that the succession representative may act as an independent administrator or independent executor is sufficient to constitute authorization for independent administration of an estate. And the obvious import of that is if your testator has a person that he or she trusts to do, to do what needs to be done and to do it in a fair manner, making that administrator or executor independent means that they don't have to go back to the court every time. First of all, I mean, it only comes into play if there's a succession open with administration. But if there is a succession open with administration, it means that an independent executor doesn't have to run back to court every time something needs to be done to get a specific order of the court to be able to do it. So it can be very convenient and a good thing for on the succession end of things, but it also means that you have a lot of trust in that executor, that they don't need to be looked at that closely by the court. Let's see the next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Go back to the previous one, please. I forgot about the skull and crossbones. How can I forget that? Testamentary trusts. I get clients in all the time, every week, clients and potential clients saying, do I need a trust? I saw on the internet that, trusts are a great thing, and, do I need a trust? Generally speaking, the answer is no. Louisiana is behind the rest of the universe in many, many ways. However, Louisiana succession law is really pretty good. It's pretty cheap. It's pretty fast. It's pretty fair. There is no particular reason in a regular routine case to have a trust. There are a lot of reasons not to have a trust. And so the general answer is don't believe everything you read on the internet. I mean, a lot of that information is put out there by companies in the other 49 states who are trying to sell trusts. And the big pitch is, oh, you can avoid probate by doing this. Well, you might want to avoid probate in some other state, but there's no particular reason why you need to do that here. Now, here's the other side of the coin. We're dealing with low-income clients. Low-income clients very often have serious concerns about two different things. One, they are worried about losing their eligibility for Medicare and Social Security disability benefits, and if they accept property. But two, when they're writing the will, they're worried that somebody they want to leave money to or property to might lose their benefits. So, I want to leave it to my son, but my son is disabled. And, what happens if my son inherits the house, well, what happens is he's in trouble with Medicare, and his benefits could either be suspended for a while or terminated. So it's a really serious concern with low income clients dealing with those situations. And you just have to figure out how you're going to deal with that. In my particular organization, the Pro Bono Project, right now, we don't have anybody who does trust work. I consider it, and I refuse to do it, and I refuse to do it because I'm not competent to do it. And if you are in that situation and you just need to counsel your clients to maybe look elsewhere for help, I really don't know what to say except that I consider it a specialty, and I recommend that people go on the State Bar Association website and look for specialists at estate planning. Of course, you realize you're talking to low income clients, and estate planners are really expensive. So it's just a mess. I mean, it's an unmet need. It's a problem that's out there, but I can't do a trust, so I don't do them. The other thing that has come on the scene lately is Louisiana Guardianship Services, and I think it's always worthwhile to recommend that the client check out that organization, because one of the things they do is trust work. There are a couple of attorneys there that do trusts, and even better than that, it's the only organization in Louisiana I know of that has a pooled trust, which is great for low income clients, because typically, if you want to set up a trust that's going to be run by a professional trustee, you better have a couple of $100,000 or $500,000 in the corpus of the trust, or you're not going to get anybody to take on the work. But Louisiana Guardianship Services has a pooled trust available, and no matter how small the estate is, they can set it up as its own kind of sub trust within the pool, and it's a tremendous advantage, which I highly recommend you check out if the occasion arises. Let's look at the next slide, please. We're talking about the duty of diligence under Rules of Professional Conduct 1.3, which says a lawyer shall act with reasonable diligence and promptness in representing a client. And this is a continuing problem for my particular organization. As I said, we're set up to where we can handle certain things in house, fortunately, including wills and powers of attorney. But when you're trying to place files with volunteer attorneys out in the community, you've got a built-in time delay. I mean, we have a time lag anyway because we're a subgrantee of SLLS. So, there could be a time delay between the time the client walks into SLLS and the time that we open our file. And then if we try to place it with an outside attorney, that's another time delay there. But even if we keep it in-house, there's a built-in delay. And so this slide really is sort of aimed at those attorneys who may be out there in private practice and volunteering to take on work. And if you deal with those clients, I suggest that you gently ask them to not take a case if they know they don't have time to handle it. And if they've accepted a case and something comes up at work and they're suddenly swamped, just call the organization that gave you the case and give it back to them. Don't let it sit there for months and months while you feel guilty and go about doing what you need to do on your other cases. And finally, I try to gently say to our volunteers, one of the cool things about accepting a pro bono case is that it gives you an opportunity to learn something new. When I retired from my regular practice of law several years ago, I started taking pro bono cases in successions because I didn't know anything about it and wanted to learn about it, and it was a nice, safe way to do it. But that assumes that I was going to put the time and effort into it, and since I was retired, that was not a problem. But again, it's the time crunch and the having to feed the money machine that can get you into trouble time wise. There's a case down there cited in Ray Hensley, Louisiana Supreme Court. And again, don't make too much out of it. By the time the attorney drafted the will, the client had died intestate, and he ended up getting 6 months probation and 5 hours CLE training. Legal ethics was ordered, and having sat through about a half an hour of this training, you can imagine how horrible 5 hours of it would be. But anyway, the case is a little misleading because there were also other violations that the attorney was guilty of, having to do with probating a holographic will that turned out to be forged. So you won't necessarily, I don't mean to imply that you would get suspended for 6 months if you don't get your will written before the client dies. There could be a lot of reasons for that, but it is an obligation, and it is an obligation that we all owe to our pro bono clients just as much as we would owe to a paying client. Next slide, please. Communication, Rule of Professional Conduct 1.4. 1.4 is not as general as 1.3. 1.3 is just really general, be reasonably diligent, be prompt. Rule 1.4 is specific, and it says you have to promptly inform the client of anything requiring the client's informed consent. You have to reasonably consult about how you'll accomplish the client's objectives. You have to keep the client reasonably informed of the status. You have to promptly comply with reasonable requests for information. You must consult with the client about limits of what you can ethically do. And you must give the client sufficient information to participate intelligently. So those specific duties are not derived from case law. They're written into the rule itself. Let's take a next slide, please. You also owe the duty of confidentiality, and Rule 1.6 is kind of lengthy, but the part of it that we're really worried about here or concerned about here says that a lawyer shall not reveal information relating to the representation of a client unless the client gives informed consent or the disclosure is impliedly authorized in order to carry out the representation. Probably your organization is already set up. If I know SLLS, Acadiana, Pro Bono Project, I'm sure Catholic Charities, I'm sure all of these groups are already set up to automatically send out a form of a waiver, and the waiver says that I, client, give this attorney permission to speak to my daughter, my cousin, whoever about about this case. And it really needs to be automatic for wills and powers of attorney, because in so many of these cases you end up having to speak with the relatives. So it's just, and when it comes to that, you don't want to have to stop and go through a couple of weeks or a month delay trying to get a waiver from the client into the file. So it's really better just to get that at the beginning when you're setting up the file and gather the information in the first place, and doing the screening to set the file up. Next slide, please. Duty of loyalty, covered by Rules of Professional Conduct 1.7 and 110. And other places as well. But these two rules deal with the general conflict of interest rules. And you kind of know what a conflict of interest is. It's not that hard to figure out. But 1.7 says a conflict of interest exists if the representation of one client will be directly adverse to another client, or if there's a significant risk that the representation of one or more clients will be materially limited by the lawyer's responsibilities to another client, a former client, a third person, or by a personal interest of the lawyer. Some client conflicts can be cured by having each client consent in writing to representing the new client, and some can't. If you do that, go that route of having the client consent in writing to this conflict, please be sure you read Rule 1.7, because it sets forth 4 conditions you must meet in that case. Rule 1.10 generally disqualifies the whole firm if there's a conflict with one of the firm's lawyers. In other words, don't try the Chinese wall, it doesn't work. The rule does grant an exception for certain low-grade conflicts, but there's a wrinkle here. Let's go to the next slide, please. Rule 6.5, there's a special rule for some pro bono situations. That's why I told you at the beginning that every once in a while you may want to look for a technical definition of what is pro bono legal work, in which case, of course, you go back to, I think it was Rule 1.6. But Rule 6.5 says that you can take on a limited pro bono assignment, such as drafting or executing a power of attorney or a will, through the auspices of a nonprofit or the court, without having to put the prospective's client name through your firm's full conflict check protocol. So again, this is more aimed at attorneys who are in private practice who volunteer to take on work. So that, you know, a private attorney from Jones Walker who shows up to do a Will for Heroes event, for example, doesn't have to run that client through the Jones Walker conflict protocol, as long as the attorney doesn't personally know of a conflict between that attorney or one of the other firm attorneys and the prospective client. And that rule was really enacted to deal with kind of cleaning up after disaster situations where there's been a hurricane or a flood, and you know, lawyers descend on the devastated area and start doing things like wills and powers of attorney, and they're all, you know, employed by big law, and big law's got big conflict checks and all that. So this rule is really designed more for them to say, well, yeah, in that situation, unless you personally know of a conflict, you can go ahead and write the will or the power of attorney. Let's see the next slide, please. Rule 1.8 is a specific rule dealing with testamentary gifts to a lawyer. And it says that a lawyer shall not solicit any substantial gift from a client, including a testamentary gift, or prepare on behalf of a client an instrument giving the lawyer or giving a person related to the lawyer any substantial gift, unless the lawyer or other recipient of the gift is related to the client as spouse, child, grandchild, parent, or grandparent. You know, this again is unlikely to be anything that you ever run into if you are working for SLLS or Acadiana or my group Pro Bono or Catholic Charities or one of those people. But if you're, you know, if your neighbor who you've known for forever asks you to write a will, and you're writing the will, and the neighbor says, look, you know, I'm not that close to that many people. You've always been a good guy, and you know, I'd like to leave you my car when I die. Yeah, Rule 1.8 says don't do that. That's a substantial gift, and unless that person is your spouse, child, grandchild, parent, or grandparent, don't do it. Cousins, uncles don't count. Close friends don't count. Longtime clients don't count. Close neighbors don't count. It's a very short list of who you can go down that road with. Next slide, please. This is kind of the end of the road here, and it's there's an interesting kind of gray area of practicing having to deal with determining capacity to sign a will. Civil Code Articles 1470 and 1476 say that the law presumes everybody over 16 is competent. So there's a presumption that this person signing this will is competent. 1477, though, applies a test. And this is not a test to whether you can sign you know, a contract with somebody. It's not a test of whether you should be interdicted or not. It's a test whether you can sign a will. And the test is the ability, whether the testator has the ability to comprehend generally the nature and consequences of the donation. So donation there meaning donation mortis causa. And 1471 says that the testator's capacity must exist at the time they execute the instrument. And that can be tricky because you could be dealing with a client who is deteriorating, and that client could be lucid one day, could have lucid intervals, and there are many, many cases that are litigated along those lines. One of the things that I thought was interesting was this case out of New Jersey from 1991, Lovett v. Estate of Lovett. And what happened in that case was that the lawyer kind of had some doubts about whether the testator's dementia was too far gone. And so what the lawyer did was he taped all of his interviews with the client, including taping an interview with the client right before he signed the will. I mean, at the will signing ceremony, right before the guy signed it, the lawyer had a conversation with him. And those tapes were put in evidence at this trial where the validity of the will was attacked. And there were three statements that the court made that I think are relevant and good to keep in mind as you find yourself in similar situations. The first statement is that a lawyer has an obligation not to permit a client to execute documents if he or she believes that client to be incompetent. And again, incompetent is, you're reading a case from New Jersey, but incompetent for our purposes refers back to Civil Code Article 1477, the ability to comprehend generally the nature and consequences of the donation. So applied to Louisiana, the statement would be a lawyer has an obligation not to permit a client to execute documents if he or she believes the client does not comprehend generally the nature and consequences of the donation. The second statement I think that's useful out of the Lovett case is that circumstances which would justify a suggestion from a lawyer that a client be psychiatrically evaluated as a prerequisite to signing legal documents would be rare. And I think the obvious reason the court says that is because otherwise every will contest would say you lawyer should have ordered a psychiatric evaluation. I mean, it would be raised in every case, and lawyers being defensive-minded people when it comes to liability would pretty much be forced to start ordering psychiatric evaluations in every case. And that's just not a desirable outcome. Number three, the court says that in most circumstances, meeting with a client alone would be well advised. For example, a combination of circumstances may lead a reasonably prudent practitioner to suspect that a client may not be acting independently or to suspect undue influence by a spouse or other family member. And this is something that I run into a lot. And I've started making it much more of a practice in these. If there's any question at all, I want to meet with the testator before signing alone with nobody else in the room and say, is this what go through the will? Look, according to this will, you're giving this property to this person, you're giving that property to that person, you're making this person the executor, and keep asking the client, is this what you want? Not in a confrontational way, but in a way to give that person a chance to say, no, not really. And the red flags go up in those cases where you've been dealing the whole time with somebody else other than the testator. The testator's daughter is the one, or son is the one who called up and had the file open, and it's been the contact person. It's been the person that there's a waiver where mama says it's okay to talk to the son, so the son opens the file, the son is your contact, you get all the information, you have all the questions, and you're not really sure who's telling you how to dispose of the estate, whether it's the son or the mother or the father. So that's a really common situation in our practice to have files that have that red flag in them. And in those situations, I think you should certainly talk to the testator and make sure that that's what the testator wants. Are we at the end of the road here? Is there another one, or was that it? That was it. Okay, so we are done. Thank you.
Figure out all of the buttons. Thank you, Joe. I learned a lot. There's a lot of considerations as we move into some of the clinic circumstances. And I thought I would stick around for 4 hours, Joe, of your CLE. So are there any questions about this or about moving forward? We hope that this CLE encourages you, for those who are not currently employed by a legal services entity, that it encourages you and promotes an environment in which you will do pro bono services, whether it's with the Pro Bono Project, with SLLS, with Acadiana, Wills for Heroes. There are tons of opportunities. And our purpose in this was, yes, to alleviate heirs property ultimately, but also how we can get there is by empowering the attorneys who are handling a lot of these cases, and that's you. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Amanda and Joe, for your time, experience, and expertise. And thank you to Hancock Whitney for your support in making this event possible. Stay tuned for some emails from Appleseed on the next pro bono clinics as we start to use the will generator throughout the state. If you have any questions or comments, please email me. My email is awheeler, WHEELER, @louisianaappleseed.org. See you again soon. Thanks so much.